welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today we'll explore the complex and rather emotional journey to parenthood. We are honored to have with us Dr. Devika Gunashila, who is a leading expert in the field of reproductive health. She has decades of experience and has treated countless couples through the challenges of fertility and healthcare. Doctor, we are so glad that you could join us today.
Thank you very much, Shruti. I am indeed honored to be here. And I think it's very nice that you've made a program addressing so many important aspects of parenthood and its journey, which can be complex for certain people. So, thank you for inviting me.
We are so glad to have you again. High risk pregnancies and unexplained fertility and heartbreaking miscarriages. These are very sensitive topics and very common. Yet couples shy away from talking about it in the open. Do you think there needs to be more awareness around these subject lines?
Yes, definitely about miscarriages and infertility, because infertility is still a taboo in our country, and society is not kind to women who are having difficulty in conceiving, and that's a fact, and that's a harsh reality. And I think awareness has increased compared to, shall we say, in 2000 or 2001, 2002, because now women are opening up. Because I think thanks to the internet and the social media and the flood of information that you can get, which is easily available, I think people are opening up and are seeking help. Like I can tell you, in 2001 and 2002, when I came back from England and I was basically working with infertile couples, there would always be a couple who would say, the wife was always willing to get examined and have all the 101 tests done, whereas the husband would say, I'm perfectly fine, you just test her, I'm okay, without actually undergoing any tests. But then that has changed, and I think it's a very welcome change where men are also coming forward and saying, listen, do I need to have any tests done? And of course they need to have tests done, and it's very heartwarming so that people are coming out. But it is still a taboo, unfortunately, and people should come away from that and seek help at an earlier stage rather than waiting and waiting and waiting and then coming at the last minute.
You mentioned about internet. How much should we trust the internet?
There's loads of information on the internet, and it's how you actually filter it. So when I talk about the internet, I'm not talking about trying to kind of treat yourself or trying to decipher or get psyched out about what there is, but at least internet has made people aware of various treatments that are available, or where they can go, or how they can go to seek help, or when to seek help. And even taking that first step towards the doctor saying, listen, I have a problem, I need to consult somebody, is important. And maybe the internet does help you to kind of go out and seek that help.
All right. So, touching upon high risk pregnancies, in India or abroad, especially in India, you talk about pregnancy. If a person is pregnant, it's a time for celebration.
Yes.
But there's that constant fear of, what might go wrong. So what exactly happens during pregnancy and the risks surrounding it?
Yeah, pregnancy is taken for granted a lot of the time, and it usually is like that. If somebody conceives naturally, it is a time to celebrate, it is a time of happiness, and immediately you start to hope. It gives rise to a lot of hope and dreams, which very often get fulfilled and come true. But there is a certain set of people who do get pregnant and miscarry. But having said that, miscarriage is very common. Okay, if one gets pregnant, there is a 25% chance of getting having a miscarriage, which means that 1 in 4 women miscarry. Yeah, so that's quite a large number. And in that 25%, 15% of the women have actually had a pregnancy test. They know they're pregnant, or they've had a scan, they've seen a small sac on the scan, and they've seen a pregnancy there. but and they miscarry, so that's a known miscarriage. Whereas the remaining, shall we say, 5 to 10% will only have a late heavy period with a lot of cramps, and then they will attribute it to, oh, I was very stressed out, or I had an exam, or I went on a trek and I climbed this mountain, and I think that's why my period got delayed, and I've had a heavy period, when it could actually be a pregnancy. So those are unknown pregnancy losses. So if you kind of put them both together, almost 1 in 4 women miscarry. So it's not an uncommon phenomenon to have a miscarriage. But when it becomes a problem is that if a woman keeps miscarrying over and over again, then it becomes a recurrent pregnancy loss.
What type of pregnancies are labeled as high risk pregnancies?
The thing is that high risk is a very broad term. So any pregnancy that would have should we say slightly more complicated than a normal course would be termed as high risk. See, the thing is, the best time for a woman to get pregnant is between 21 to about 32. Okay, 32 or 33, or you can extend it to 35. After which the body physiology also changes. So pregnancy is not a disease state, it is just an alteration of the normal physiology of the body. So when you're younger, a woman is able to take all the various physiological changes that happen in the body to accommodate the growing baby that is inside the womb. As a woman grows older, then those your arteries become a little bit more stiff. So suppose somebody is having a pregnancy at 40 years of age, it's not going to be the same as somebody having a pregnancy at 30 years of age, or even 35. So there are various risk factors that we go through, starting from her age. You have a risk assessment form which will actually tell you whether the patient is actually at a higher risk of having problems or not in pregnancy. So that starts with looking at her age, more than 35, whether she's obese, whether she's had any previous pregnancies which have ended in a miscarriage, what about her lifestyle, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, smoking. So those are all the factors that could put her into a high risk category. Then you would look at her, shall we say, her family history. What is the family history? Is she married in the family? That's another story. Yeah. Okay, because that kind of can lead to genetic disorders in the offspring. So is she married? And that happens very commonly in our country, where you get married in the family. So that is one thing. And then the second thing would be other family history of any congenital abnormalities, any specially able children in the family, any genetic disorders. And then you would move on to her own history of having any medical problems like cardiac problems, heart problems, kidney problems, any situations where she's had a clot in her blood vessels at any time, strokes, thyroid problems, is she on any medication, epilepsy is another story which is very important to kind of look at. And then, of course, you look at surgical history, any other surgical problems. So, as you keep going down the list, has she had, how many miscarriages has she had? Has she had pregnancies which have ended in problems? Does she have any live children? So, as you keep on looking at all the various risks, then you have which is present in a risk assessment form. Then you will kind of categorize the woman as high risk, moderate risk, low risk. If she's just had one normal pregnancy where she's delivered vaginally and she's coming for the second one, it's not such a big problem. But then if she's had 8 miscarriages and a history of, shall we say, having been married for 10 years, and she's got other associated problems like a high blood pressure or diabetes is another story. So all those, then that automatic, and she's, shall we say, 38, then that kind of puts her into a little bit of a higher risk category than the other lady.
There's so much data. Hats off to you, doctors. Also, you mentioned something very important, which is quite common in the Indian household. Marrying within the families. I hear it is okay marrying off if it is a maternal side. Some religions say paternal side. Can you please bust the myth? What is
I don't know about paternal and maternal side, but I do know that marrying in the family may not be the wisest thing, because the person as such who the lady is marrying may be okay. and his parents may be okay, but then there are genes that are carried in generations, and they skip a generation or two, and they are manifested in the next generation. Now they may not manifest. Suppose this lady is marrying her uncle, which is quite a common situation. The uncle may be perfectly normal to look at and going about his regular activities. There's no problem with him, but he may be carrying a gene which is there in the body, which she may also be carrying, because she comes from the same family. So the gene doesn't manifest as a disease in either of the two individuals, but when they have a baby, the two genes that come together can actually manifest a problem in the baby. And then we go into further very involved discussion of whether these are autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant, and all that kind of a thing. But we won't go there because that's another complicated issue by itself. But then there can be genetic mutations. Mutations are alterations in the regular gene structure, which do not manifest as a disease in the individual who is carrying it, but when he mates with another individual carrying the same gene, which is also not manifested in the woman who is coming from the same family, it can affect the baby.
Okay. All right. You also mentioned about the age. What
Yeah.
is safer? So it doesn't mean that if you're younger, your pregnancies will be all healthy. It's just that it's safer to, conceive within 35 years of age.
Yes. Because again, when you're younger, you're more healthy, your physiology is different, your heart is able to take the extra load of this having a baby. If you're not obese and you're of good health, you most probably won't develop diabetes, you won't develop hypertension or high blood pressure. Whereas when you get older, there are lots of other factors. Your blood vessels are not as pliable, your heart may be not as strong. So maybe if somebody is getting older, pregnant at, shall we say, 38 or 40 years of age, they quite often are quite okay. The older a woman becomes or gets, and she gets pregnant at a later stage, the higher the risk for diabetes and high blood pressure and all the associated complications of bleeding and smaller babies. Babies don't grow as well. They don't reach their full growth potential. So those kind of complications happen. The second thing is that as a woman grows older and after the age of 35, it's not only in a woman, it's in all women, and it's a universal phenomenon. The quality of eggs starts to come down. So as a result of that, there's a higher chance of miscarriage, there's a higher chance of not getting pregnant, and there's a higher chance of having specially able children.
All right. Could you throw some light on ectopic pregnancy?
Yeah, sure. A pregnancy is supposed to be inside the uterus, okay? The uterus has two tubes, which are called the fallopian tubes, which are connected to it, and whose main function is to transfer the egg towards the uterus and transfer the sperm, which is deposited in the vagina, towards the egg, okay? And then once the egg and the sperm meet in the tube, in the fallopian tube, it kind of develops. So once the egg and the sperm meet, it forms a cell, and then the cell divides into two, and then 2 divides into 4, and then each cell divides into 2. So you have 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. And as it forms an embryo, it comes rolling back into the uterus and gets stuck in the uterus. So that is the normal way a pregnancy happens. It takes about 5 to 6 days for the embryo that is formed to come back and sit inside the uterus. In some patients, this embryo, while it's on its journey to the uterus, gets stuck in the tube, in the fallopian tube. And then it starts to develop there. And that is what is called as an ectopic pregnancy. Ectopic is something that is not in the right place. It is outside the place that it is supposed to be in.
All right, that sounds really scary. How risky is it for the pregnant woman?
It is quite a risky proposition, because risky scenario, shall I say, because the tube is a very thin, delicate structure. It can only expand to a certain limit, after which it will burst. So when you have a pregnancy that is growing in the tube, the pregnancy is growing, it's kind of getting its blood supply, and the placenta is there, and everything is kind of going on with the pregnancy. But then, unlike the uterus, which is very, very small in a non-pregnant state, and then when the patient is fully pregnant and is ready to deliver, the uterus kind of reaches the chest, okay, compresses the chest. So the uterus is an expandable organ, whereas the tube is not. So the tube will burst after a few weeks of growth. The tube will just burst, and the patient can bleed torrentially, and that is one of the few gynecological emergencies that we have. And the patient can bleed. They can bleed. We have 5 liters of blood in our body. They can bleed at least about 2-3 liters in, shall we say, 20-25 minutes.
Is there a time duration when it could happen, or it can happen anytime?
Yeah, it can happen at any time. It can happen 6 weeks, 7 weeks of pregnancy. So basically, as soon as a patient gets pregnant, instead of relying on the urine pregnancy sticks, that is okay to kind of make sure that you're pregnant or not pregnant, but then they must go to a doctor and say, listen, I got this urine pregnancy stick and it's positive, am I pregnant? So then what the doctor does is she will actually do a blood test, which is called as a beta HCG. Now, beta HCG is one of the most sensitive hormones for pregnancy. So it will show you, if that is positive, then the patient is 100% pregnant. If it is not positive, then she's not pregnant. So it's a good idea to go and get it done. And then also, beta HCG doubles in a pregnancy, in a good pregnancy, every 48 hours. So if it was 100, then it becomes 200, then it becomes 400 every 48 hours. Or at least should increase by about 66%. So if that happens, then the pregnancy looks like the pregnancy is inside the uterus and is going on fine. So suppose a woman goes to a gynecologist and her beta HCG is 1,500 today, and 2 days later it is 2,000 when it is actually supposed to be 3,000. Then what do we think of? Is it an ectopic, because that rings warning bells, or is it a failing pregnancy?
All right. Now, could you elaborate more on gestational pregnancy?
You mean pregnancy, intrauterine pregnancy?
Yes.
Yeah, that is the normal place where a pregnancy should be. I would advise women, as soon as they find out that they are pregnant, not to wait till 12 weeks, because we do not know what is happening with the pregnancy there. A lot of them say that my grandmother told me to go to the hospital only after 12 weeks or 3 months, so I'm come now. And then when they come, they find that the baby or the embryo or the fetus has stopped growing at 8 weeks, so they have actually miscarried. But this is called as, but they don't know, and this is called as a missed miscarriage. The baby is no longer growing, the fetal heart has stopped, but they are still feeling that they are pregnant, and they have not bled or anything, and it's 12 weeks, that is almost 3 months, and they come to you at 3 months saying that I'm pregnant, and then they have a shock. So it is a good idea to go to the gynecologist as soon as you check your urine pregnancy stick. If you're doing that, or if you've missed a period, go to the gynecologist and find out whether you're pregnant or not. And like I said, beta HCG is one of the most sensitive markers for pregnancy. And then after that, the gynecologist will take it up from there. So depending upon the beta HCG, if it is 1,500 and above, you should be able to see a small sac-like structure inside the uterus when you do a vaginal scan. So there are various ways to kind of check and see what the pregnancy is, and then take it up from there. Women should have folic acid before even trying for a pregnancy, because folic acid is a WHO recommendation, and folic acid prevents any problems with the brain and spinal cord development. So that's very, very important. Some amount of multivitamins. So that is how regular uterine pregnancy, intrauterine pregnancy will carry on. So once you go there, then the gynecologist will put you on supports if you require anything, or put you on the vitamins and folic acid, and then monitor your pregnancy, do a few scans, make sure you're okay, and make sure the pregnancy is going on fine.
Thus, aspiring parents have to think about a lot of angles. Why do these complications actually happen?
You're talking about miscarriages here, or you're talking about
generally,
ectopic?
Yes.
So ectopics can occur because of problems in the tube, okay, in the fallopian tube. Ectopics basically, if the tube is damaged, okay, or if it is diseased by some infection, or if the lumen of the tube is not uniform, so if parts of it are narrow, parts of it are wide, then the embryo that is traveling through the tube will get stuck and starts to grow there. So previous operations, etc., in the pelvis, those are all conditions that lead to an ectopic. Miscarriages, when coming to miscarriages, is a completely different ball game. Like I said, one miscarriage is kind of common, although we don't want anybody to have a miscarriage, but then 1 in 4 women miscarry, so it's quite a common condition. But then if you have repeated miscarriages, then that requires some amount of investigation. And initially, in the earlier days, there are these big bodies called ESHRE, which is the European Society for Human Reproduction, and the American Society for Reproduction, etc., who had their definitions and said that unless a woman had 3 miscarriages, you don't need to investigate her. Okay, so now that has been brought down to 2 in most of the international societies. So if a woman has 2 miscarriages, then you can actually start to investigate her. But for 1 miscarriage, you don't need any investigation. You just need a lot of TLC and reassurance and positive reinforcement to the patient and tell her, don't worry, it'll happen again, you will get pregnant. And 1 miscarriage, although it is upsetting for the couple because their hopes are dashed to the ground, they don't have to go back with a fear that they won't get pregnant again. They will get pregnant, and most probably the next pregnancy will be good and will go right up to full term, and they'll deliver a healthy baby.
As you said, I think emotionally, physically, financially, it's very daunting. So, what do you tell the couples to bring in that element of positivity?
With 1 miscarriage, it's a lot of reassurance. Even with 2, it's a lot of reassurance, because it doesn't mean that they're not going to get pregnant or they're not going to carry a pregnancy to term. They will, but it may require a little bit of tweaking. You must tell them that, listen, you will get pregnant again, take some rest, enjoy, go out, enjoy your life, and come back again, and come back as soon as you miss your period. Don't come back late, and give them some folic acid, and give them a lot of positivity. They will become pregnant. It's not that they won't, but nobody needs to jump up and down for 1 miscarriage. That's what I'm trying to say.
So, how do we prevent a miscarriage?
There are a lot of lifestyle changes that one can do, because smoking, especially in women, has a higher rate of miscarriage, as does alcohol consumption. Now, alcohol consumption, there is no set limit, but then if you're trying for a pregnancy, to stay off alcohol would be a good idea. Also incorporating some healthy lifestyle changes, eating at home, a lot more salads in your food, not staying away from processed food, staying away from plastics, food stored in plastics, incorporating some amount of exercise, and if one is obese, trying to decrease the weight even before trying for a pregnancy would be a good idea.
Okay. 1 miscarriage itself is emotionally draining. A lot of people have recurrent miscarriages. So how does a couple deal with it?
It's very difficult, because when you have 2 or 3 miscarriages, which is what would constitute your recurrent pregnancy loss, they are very upset, very depressed, very frustrated. The women feel that, oh my God, am I ever going to get pregnant again? Am I ever going to see my own baby? And that's a thought that they come with. And a lot of the time, the male partners are kind of left out of this whole scenario, but they are going through their own grief as well. So one must look after the male partner as well, and reassure the patient that it will happen. I mean, a lot of patients ask me, when is it going to happen? Now, I don't have a crystal ball to tell them when exactly they're going to deliver a baby, but after 2 or 3 miscarriages, that's when we start to investigate them and try to find out what could be the cause for this repeated occurrence. And family support, and not pointing out and saying, you should not have lifted that heavy bucket of water, or you should not have gone on a holiday, because that really doesn't make a difference to the miscarriage. She will miscarry anyway, whether she's sitting at home and lying down on the bed all the time, or whether she is gone on a holiday, it won't make a difference. So being supportive to the patient, to the lady, is very, very important, and telling her that, yeah, come on, you will get pregnant, you will get a baby, don't worry.
I think there are a lot of myths around miscarriages.
Yeah.
Just you mentioned that physical exertion actually does not impact,
Physical exertion,
or to what extent?
yeah, to a major extent. Like for example, people get pregnant and they come to me and they say, "Can we start walking?" Now, if they have never walked, done physical exercise like walking in Lal Bagh or doing 10 rounds or something in their lives before, don't start doing it now, because that is a lot of exertion. But generally, go about your regular life style with no problems. I mean, there should not be a problem. If you kind of going to exercise to the extent that you're really tired and you're really running and jogging and everything, that is not advisable. But your regular, whatever your daily activities and how much of exercise you're used to, going a kilometer or doing 2 kilometers of walk, is okay, it's fine, it's perfectly all right. Pregnancy is not a disease. So nobody needs to be on bed rest. Nobody needs to. Actually, bed rest is a huge problem, because bed rest can actually lead to a tendency to clot formation in the veins. So that is a really dangerous situation in pregnancy. And so just go about your normal activities. Do whatever exercise that you were doing before. Don't go overboard, and be healthy.
So all that you're saying is don't shock the body or don't start exercising a new regime when you get pregnant.
Yeah, there's no need, no. I mean, why should, just because you're pregnant? Okay, now I'm going to start exercising. If you've not done it before, don't do it now. But just go about. You don't have to restrict any of your activities. Just go about regular activities.
So what are the causes for recurrent miscarriages?
Yeah. Now, basically, a miscarriage is 60% or 65% of miscarriages are due to genetic problems in the baby itself. Okay, so the body will not accept something that is faulty, so it will just push out the pregnancy, and that is what a miscarriage is. Miscarriage is when pregnancy is comes to a termination or is terminated much before the period of viability, which is 24 weeks. So that is a large portion. The genetic problems is a large portion of the reasons for miscarriage. That occupies about 60 to 65% of the causes. The second cause could be, then we have a series of causes. One could be anatomical abnormalities in the uterus. So the uterus is a single cavity. So it can be divided into two halves. It can be divided into, you can only have one half of the uterus being developed, or you can have what are called as adhesions or bands in the uterus because of previous, shall we say, DNCs or previous miscarriages or manipulations inside the uterus. You can also have, that is the anatomical part of it. Second would be, shall we say, infections inside the uterus and infections of the tubes, which again does not allow a pregnancy to continue. The third would be hormonal problems. Does she have a thyroid problem? There's a hormone called prolactin, which can be high, in which case the patient will miscarry or cannot get pregnant also. What about diabetes? Diabetes is something that we need to look at. There are also, shall we say, male factors. So is the husband okay? Is the husband having any genetic problems? Does the sperm carry any genetic problems? There is something called as DNA fragmentation index, again, which we can test when we are doing the testing the husband's semen. So those again contribute to a miscarriage. Again, PCO, polycystic ovaries, is another condition where there's a higher incidence of miscarriage, basically because of the quality of the eggs. They produce a lot of eggs, but there are a lot of hormonal disturbances in these women, which will again contribute to a miscarriage. Again, then you come to autoimmune factors. So are there something called as antiphospholipid syndrome, systemic lupus erythematosus. There are so many SLE, in short. There are so many auto antibodies that are produced against the pregnancy and against the placenta, again, which is related to miscarriage. And then there are alloimmune factors. Alloimmune factors are basically, it's based on the concept that a baby is a foreign body, right? It is a foreign body because half of it belongs to the mother and the other half belongs to the father. Now, the father's genes are foreign to the mother, right? So suppose you take a kidney and put it into somebody without matching, then the recipient's body will reject that kidney. So actually speaking, all women should not get pregnant because they're holding that foreign body inside the uterus. But the uterus is a fantastic organ. It's simply awesome because when the baby, which is half father, which is foreign to the mother, and half mother, goes and sits inside the uterus produces a shell around the embryo, which is going to be the baby as it develops, and shows off to her own immune system that this is mine. So don't touch it. This is mine. So it kind of masks the fact that the baby is foreign and contains foreign antigens, which is through the father, and shows off to the immune system that this is mine, and continues to protect that baby and grows it.
Wow.
Yeah. So when there are mechanisms that are not working in this whole system, then again the immune system recognizes it as a foreign body because these mechanisms are not in place, and will throw out the pregnancy. So there are various reasons for a miscarriage to happen.
I'm just curious, after a miscarriage, how does it physically harm a woman, and how long does she take to come out of a miscarriage?
That is highly individualistic. It doesn't harm the patient as such. And nowadays, trying to kind of doing what is called as a mechanical evacuation of the uterus. That means, before they used to do what is called as a dilatation and curettage, in short DNC, where they used to scrape the contents that are there inside the uterus out. That is no longer done. Very, very rarely is it is done, but it's very rare. Most of the time we give patients, suppose they've had a miscarriage, to expel the whole thing out, for it to all come out, we give them medication, and a lot of the time it all comes out. So really it's not that, shall we say, there's not that many complications, or it's quite a safe procedure. But the psychological impact of having a miscarriage, that is very, very difficult to accept. And that is highly individualistic. Some people say it doesn't matter. They have optimist will say, doesn't matter, I've had a problem, but then I will bounce back and I will again get pregnant, and there's no problem. And the maximum time that a person needs to wait is about 1 or 2 months maximum before she starts to try again. Well, other people who are not as strong psychologically, or who have pinned all their hopes on it, or people who have been married for a long time and have been trying and then get pregnant and then miscarry, though that really produces a problem for them psychologically. But there are ways to kind of bring them back, a little bit of psychological help. Like for us, we have a psychological counselor, and we do a definite treatment for them, not in terms of medication, but in terms of counseling and various techniques to bring back positivity.
So what constitutes a high-risk pregnancy, and how do you monitor it?
A high-risk pregnancy is a pregnancy that has a few more complications than what a normal pregnancy course would be like. So we are talking about, shall we say, high blood pressure, developing a high blood pressure during pregnancy. That's called as pregnancy-induced hypertension, or gestational diabetes. That is again a woman who is not diabetic but has developed diabetes during pregnancy. Or they could also be diabetic before pregnancy and then now have had an increased level of sugars in their blood and requires a lot more strict control. Then we are also talking about something called as placenta previa, where the placenta, which is the connecting link between the mother and the baby, through which all the nutrients are given to the baby and all the waste products are given to the mother, that is situated low down inside the uterus. The normal location of a placenta should be on the top, on the fundal area, what we call as fundal area. But when it comes to the bottom of the uterus, where the neck of the womb is, then they can have repeated bleeding episodes in pregnancy. So a high blood pressure with all its associated risks, like bleeding in the second or the third half of pregnancy, and fits, etc., that happen because of a high blood pressure. So lot of things, associated factors. Also babies that are not reaching their full growth potential. So they are small babies. They are called as intrauterine growth restriction. So the baby is, suppose the baby is supposed to be, shall we say, at least 2.5 or 2.75 kgs at term. Term is when the patient is supposed to deliver. That is anywhere between 37 weeks of pregnancy and 42. If the baby is 1.5 kgs, that means the baby is still very small at 37 weeks, so it has not reached its full growth potential. So those kind of pregnancies will be termed as high risk. It's also if patients have lost babies for whatever reasons in the past, 2 or 3 stillbirths, 2 or 3 what are called as intrauterine deaths. The baby has died inside the uterus. So those would all constitute high risk pregnancies. And how you monitor them is basically the patient should come for regular antenatal checkups. So with every checkup, the sugars are monitored, the blood sugars are monitored, and the BPs are checked, the weight gain is checked. And then definitely the boon to us is now ultrasound, which has been around for many years. And ultrasound scanning has become a commonplace in pregnancy. Every gynecologist and everybody uses ultrasound. So ultrasound monitoring of the baby's growth, where the placental location, the amount of fluid inside the baby, whether the baby is moving nicely, the baby's hands, legs, mouths, intestines, liver, giver, everything is monitored. So ultrasound is a real boon. And then also you look at the blood flow through the baby. That is another very, very important. It's called Doppler scanning, and that's a very, very important tool for us, where we can actually make out whether the baby is getting enough oxygen or not, and the blood supply to the baby is enough or not. So those are some of the tools. Again, when the patient is in labor, that means when she's actually going to deliver or she's in the process of delivering, at that time we monitor the baby's heart through a cardiotocograph machine. So that is a continuous monitoring of the baby's heart. So there are various methods to find out, but ultrasound seems to be the mainstay. And again, we have tests which look at the genetic, which combine ultrasound markers and blood markers to give a risk assessment to the baby. So how high is the risk of having a baby that is, shall we say, mentally retarded, or going to be disabled, so mentally challenged. That is one of the tests that come in, and we advise all women to undergo that test. There's another test called NIPT, which is the newer version of genetic screening, where it's very simple. They take the mother's blood and they look at the fetal DNA in it. So that way, a lot of interventions and tests that have come out which can actually monitor that pregnancy.
There seems to be a lot of myths around high pregnancies. For instance, the baby will be premature, or the woman has to have a C-section.
No, not necessarily. I mean, with a lot of the interventions that we give, like for example, suppose the baby is not growing well enough, then we will increase the nutritional support, give the mother a lot more protein, a high protein diet, also give her some, IV fluids with amino acids in it and things like that to support the pregnancy and make the baby grow. And quite often it reaches a stage of viability, and we definitely try to push it to at least 37 weeks. And if we can't, we will try to push it to at least 32 or 34 weeks. So the thing is, every stage is a milestone. So if I have a high risk pregnancy and I'm having problems, I will say, let's push it till 28 weeks. That is my first goal. In my own mind, that is my first goal. After which, if the baby is doing all right, I want to push it to 30 weeks. And I will tell, counseling is very important for the parents. They must be included in all your decisions, and you must be telling them exactly what is in your mind and what you intend doing. And so then you go to 30 weeks, then you go to 32, then you go to 34. When I reach 34, I know that the baby is going to be fine. I may not necessarily deliver it at 34, but in case it comes, especially in a high-risk pregnancy, if it comes to a situation where she has to be delivered early, at 34 weeks is a good time. I know that the baby will be 98% okay. She will get a baby in her hand. But it's not a rule that every high-risk pregnancy ends in a cesarean. That's not right.
All right.
Yeah, you can also, if with good monitoring, you can kind of push them right up to 38 weeks, which is term. or 39 and deliver them normally.